literature that leads us to Jesus. Our How to Read the Bible series.
Hello, guys. How's it going? Hello. 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 For those who don't know, my name is Benny. I'm one of the youth interns here, and I will be continuing on our journey through the Bible. And today, I will be talking about Joseph, mainly Joseph and his brothers, of course, because they're both part of the story. And that is my title for the sermon tonight. And so, if you guys want to open up to Genesis 37, that's where we are going to be. By the way, I use NIV, so if yours says something a little bit different than mine, it's because I'm an NIV. Also, I'm not going to cover every single detail of Joseph's life or his family's life. So if you want to read Joseph's entire story, read Genesis 37 through 50, chapters 37 through 50. If you want to know everything, I'll just be skipping through it a little bit. Okay, so we are in Genesis 37, Genesis 37, verse 3. Now Israel, Joseph's father, loved Joseph more than any of his other sons, because he had been born to him in an old age, and he made an ornate robe for him. So if you're anything like me, I saw the word ornate, and I'm like, what does that mean? And the Bible app has this pretty cool thing where next to the words, it has a little comment box. And so I clicked on that, and this is what it told me. The meaning of the Hebrew for this word is uncertain. That doesn't really help me at all to understand what that means. And so, like a natural Gen Zer, I went to Google, put in the word ornate, and this is the definition it gave me. Made in an intricate shape or decorated with complex patterns. So this robe was amazing. This is probably like the most expensive thing Jacob has ever spent on someone. And I grew up in church, and in Sunday school, we called it the robe of many colors. So I assume it was like every sleeve, every leg had a different pattern with a bunch of different colors on it. It was the most expensive thing you could buy for someone, a robe at least. And when Joseph's brothers saw this, they weren't too happy about it, as you can presume a father showing favoritism toward one of his sons. And so we're going to move on to Genesis 37, 4 through 11. When his brothers saw that their father loved him more than any of them, they hated him and could not speak a kind word to him. Joseph had a dream, and when he told it to his brothers, they hated him all the more. He said to them, "Listen to this dream I had. We were binding sheaves of grain out in the field, when suddenly my sheaf rose and stood upright, while your sheaves gathered around mine and bowed down to it." His brothers said to him, "Do you intend to reign over us? Will you actually rule us?" And they hated him all the more because of his dream and what he had said. Then he had another dream, and he told his brothers, "Listen," he said, "I had another dream, and this time the sun and moon and 11 stars were bowing down to me." When he told his father, as well as his brothers, his father rebuked him and said, "What is this dream you had? Will your mother and I and your brothers actually come and bow down to the ground before you?" His brothers were jealous of him, but his fathers kept the matter in mind. So that is my first point for tonight, jealousy. Can anyone give me a definition of jealous or jealousy, just off the top of their head? Cody? Wanting what someone else says? Wanting to change something to be like someone. Anyone else have a little definition for me? Oh, good. And so I also looked this up and wanted to see what people had to say about jealousy. And jealous means feeling or showing envy of someone or their achievements and advantages. Do any of you know what Disney Infinity is? Like, Kyle knows, you had these characters and you put them on a platform. It was like, it basically, Disney's version of Skylanders, basically. And so in elementary school, this was a pretty big game within my class. And I had this friend who had a lot more characters than I did. And I wanted what he had. And so I would purposely go over to his house just so I can use the characters. Kind of taking advantage of him a little bit, just because I wanted what he has. I was jealous of him. And I also thought about stealing them a couple times, but don't worry. I prayed about it. I talked to God. I repented. We're good now. It was okay. With jealousy can also come hatred, though. Like it said many times, his brothers hated him because of the dreams and because of their father's favoritism toward him. And when you are jealous, it can lead you to do things you might regret later, and we're going to see how that affected his brothers. So if you want to turn to Genesis 37:12 through 19. Now his brothers had gone to graze their father's flocks near Shechem, and Israel said to Joseph, "As you know, your brothers are grazing flocks near Shechem. Come, I am going to send you to them." "Very well," he replied. So he said to him, "Go and see if all is well with your brothers and with the flocks, and bring word back to me." Then he sent him off from the valley of Hebron. When Joseph arrived at Shechem, a man found him wandering around the fields and asked him, "What are you looking for?" He replied, "I'm looking for my brothers. Can you tell me where they are grazing their flocks?" They have moved on from here," the man answered. "I heard them say, 'Let's go to Dothan.'" So Joseph went after his brothers and found them near Dothan. But they saw him in the distance, and before he reached them, they plotted to kill him. "Here comes that dreamer," they said to each other. That is insane to me, that his brothers were so jealous and had so much hatred toward him that as soon as they saw him in the distance, they wanted to kill him. I just can't imagine having that much jealousy and hatred for someone to actually think about killing them and actually plan out that. We're going to move on to the next section. Genesis 37:20 through 34, and then 36. "Come now, let's kill him and throw him into one of these cisterns." A cistern was a place where they kept water, and sometimes they used it as a toilet. So they were going to throw him in one of those. "And say that a ferocious animal devoured him. Then we'll see what comes of his dreams." When Reuben heard this, he tried to rescue him from their hands. "Let's not take his life," he said. "Don't shed any blood. Throw him into the cistern here in the wilderness, but don't lay a hand on him." Reuben said this to rescue him from them and take him back to his father. So when Joseph came to his brothers, they stripped him of his robe, the ordinate robe he was wearing, and they took him and threw him into the cistern. The cistern was empty, luckily. There was no water in it. As they sat down to eat their meal, they looked up and saw a caravan of Ishmaelites coming from Gilead. Their camels were loaded with spices, balm, and myrrh, and they were on their way to take them down to Egypt. Judah said to his brothers, "What will we gain if we kill our brother and cover up his blood? Come, let's sell them to the Ishmaelites and not lay our hands on him. After all, he is our brother, our own flesh and blood." His brothers agreed, so when the Midianites merchants came by, his brothers pulled Joseph out of the cistern and sold him for 20 shekels of silver to the Ishmaelites, who took him to Egypt. When Reuben returned to the cistern and saw that Joseph was not there, he tore his clothes. He went back to his brothers and said, "The boy isn't there. Where can I turn now?" Then they got Joseph's robe, slaughtered a goat, and dipped the robe in the blood. They took the ordinate robe back to their father and said, "We found this. Examine it to see whether it is your son's robe." He recognized it and said, "It is my son's robe. Some ferocious animal has devoured him." Joseph had surely been torn to pieces. Then Jacob tore his clothes, put on a sackcloth, and mourned for his son for many days. And then verse 36. Meanwhile, the Midianites sold Joseph into Egypt to Potiphar, one of the Pharaoh's officials, the captain of the guard. I'm going to tie this back a little bit to when we talked about peer pressure. I feel like a lot of us can relate to Reuben in this situation, where something is happening, your friends are plotting to do something you don't agree with, or that might turn out really bad, and we kind of just stand there or like offer a situation that we try to fix later, but it's never going to happen because it's our own plan. And it would have been just better for Reuben to either say, "Hey, let's just not do this entirely," or just depart from the situation, just go get help from someone. Also, can we talk about how after his brothers threw Joseph in the cistern, they just sat down and had a meal? It was just another Wednesday evening, just throwing your brother in a cave with no food, no water, and just leaving him to die. And they just sat down and had a meal. Could you imagine that if your sibling did that to you, just threw you in a hole for, a little while, sat down and had food, gave nothing to you, and just then sold you? That's crazy. there was just no ounce of love for Joseph in their hearts. There was so much hatred and jealousy that clouded everything. And so we are going to move on. We're going to jump ahead a little bit to Genesis 39, 2 through 12. The Lord was with Joseph, so that he prospered, and he lived in the house of his Egyptian master. When his master saw that the Lord was with him, and that the Lord gave him success in everything he did, Joseph found favor in his eyes and became his attendant. Potiphar put him in charge of his household, and he entrusted to his care everything he owned. From the time he put him in charge of his... Wow. I got off track. From the time he put him in charge of his household and all that he owned, the Lord blessed the household of the Egyptian because of Joseph. The blessing of the Lord was on everything Potiphar had, both in the house and in the field. So Potiphar left everything he had in Joseph's care. With Joseph in charge, he did not concern himself with anything. He did not concern himself with anything except the food he ate. Now Joseph was well built and handsome, and after a while his master's wife took notice of Joseph and said, "Come to bed with me." But he refused. "With me in charge," he told her, "my master does not concern himself with anything in this house. Everything he owns he has entrusted to my care. No one is greater in this house than I am. My master has withheld nothing from me except you, because you are his wife. How then could I do such a wicked thing and sin against God?" And though she spoke to Joseph day after day, he refused to go to bed with her or even be with her. One day he went into the house to attend to his duties, and none of the household servants was inside. She caught him by his cloak and said, "Come to bed with me." But he left his cloak in her hand and ran out of the house. For real. That's amazing, by the way. Joseph resisting temptation day after day and refusing to sleep with this woman, because the consequences of doing that will be so much higher than, getting that satisfaction of pleasure for just a moment. And it's amazing to me, in this entire section of Scripture so far, we do not see anything written where Joseph is questioning or cursing out God for the things he's going through. I mean, already he's been made fun of by his brothers and just ripped of his clothes, thrown into a cistern, left to die, then sold. And not once you see it is written that Joseph complained or questioned God or doubted what God was doing, because it said God was with him and gave him favor in everything he did. And even though he was sold, he was given favor within the house and was head of the house. Which brings me to my next point, which is faith. I would love to have that, strive for that kind of faith that Joseph has. No matter what I'm going through, I don't ever expect to be sold by my brothers. But, having that faith to be like, I don't care what's going on, God is always with me. And it doesn't matter what I'm going through. That also brings up a question. How faithful are you to God when you're going through bad things? How quickly do you turn to him and ask for help? Or do you go to the things of the world? Trust me when I say, when the world will give you temporary satisfaction, and that will mean nothing to you, in a couple hours probably, depending on what it is. But if you put your faith and trust in God, you will have satisfaction for a lifetime and eternity in heaven with him. So I'm going to talk about what happens next. Potiphar's wife has his cloak now and goes to Potiphar and one of the servants there and makes up this story about how Joseph tried to sleep with her and tried to get with her. And she lied to them, obviously. And she had the cloak for proof. So nothing Joseph said would have convinced them otherwise, because she had his cloak. Okay, and then we're going to be reading in Genesis 39, 20 through 23 now. Joseph's master took him and put him in prison, the place where the king's prisoners were confined. But while Joseph was there in the prison, the Lord was with him. He showed him kindness and granted his favor in the eyes of the prison ward. So the warden put Joseph in charge of all those held in the prison, and he was made responsible for all that was done there. The warden paid no attention to anything under Joseph's care, because the Lord was with Joseph and gave him success in whatever he did. That is amazing, by the way, to be a prisoner, and not long after, the warden sees how amazing and how God has blessed you, and now you're in charge of all the prisoners. Just as a prisoner, you're in charge of the prisoners. That is amazing, by the way. That's like you becoming the captain of your sports team or something like that, and you're doing such a great job at leading your team. Your head coach doesn't even need to be there. And like they're kind of just there to, be like, good job, you're doing great. But yeah, it's pretty amazing. And while Joseph was in prison, he met two people, a chief cupbearer and then a baker. And these two had dreams. And so they came to Joseph and talked to Joseph about his dreams, seeing if Joseph would understand what they meant. And so we're going to be in Genesis 49 through 23. So the chief cupbearer told Joseph his dream. He said to him, "In my dream I saw a vine in front of me, and on the vine were 3 branches. As soon as it budded, it blossomed, and its clusters ripened into grapes. Pharaoh's cup was in my hand, and I took the grapes, squeezed them into Pharaoh's cup, and put the cup in his hand. This is what it means," Joseph said to him. "The 3 branches are 3 days. Within 3 days, Pharaoh will lift up your head and restore you to your position, and you will put Potiphar's cup in his hand, just as you used to do when you were his cupbearer. When all goes well with you, remember me and show me kindness. Mention me to Pharaoh and get me out of this prison. I was forcefully carried off from the land of the Hebrews, and even here I have done nothing to deserve being put in a dungeon." When the chief baker saw that Joseph had given a favorable interpretation, he said to Joseph, "I too had a dream. On my head there were 3 baskets of bread. In the top basket were all kinds of baked goods for Pharaoh, but the birds were eating them out of the basket on my head." "This is what it means," Joseph said. "The 3 baskets are 3 days. Within 3 days, Pharaoh will lift off your head and impale your body into a pole, and the birds will eat away your flesh." Now the 3rd day was Pharaoh's birthday, and he gave a feast for all his officials. He lifted up the heads of the chief cupbearer and the chief baker in the presence of his officials. He restored the chief cupbearer to his position so that he once again put the cup into Pharaoh's hand. But he impaled the chief baker, just as Joseph had said to them in his interpretation. The chief cupbearer, however, did not remember Joseph. He forgot him. That's crazy, by the way. That's some poor memory by the cupbearer. After 3 days of knowing a dude, you just forget about him and not bring up a single word to him, to Pharaoh. This man gave you an interpretation of your dream and gave you like the best news you could ever receive, and you just straight up forgot about him. And the first line in chapter 41 of Genesis is when 2 full years had passed. 2 full years. The cupbearer forgot about Joseph for 2 full years. I just don't understand how you forget a man you just met, tells you about a dream, and asks you to remember him, but you just forget. It's crazy to think about. Yeah. So after these 2 years, Pharaoh has a dream, and the Pharaoh needs someone to interpret the dream for him. He gathers all the wisest men he knows, all of his servants, and he's like, "Hey, I have a dream. Can you interpret this?" And none of them could. And somewhere in the back of his brain, the cupbearer, there's a spark. He's like, "Hey, I know a guy. He's in prison right now, but hey, I help me out with my dream." And Pharaoh was like, "Okay, none of these other guys can do it. Let's see if he can do it." And so we're going to be in Genesis 41, 15 through 16. Pharaoh said to Joseph, "I had a dream, and no one can interpret. But I have heard it said that that when you hear a dream, you can interpret." "I cannot do that," Joseph replied to Pharaoh, "but God will give Pharaoh the answer he desires." After being forgotten about for 2 whole years in prison, Joseph still gives the glory to God. He doesn't forget what God has done for him. He made him head of the prison. He made him the head of Potiphar's house. God has still blessed him, even with the bad things that has happened to him, and he still gives the glory to God. How good are you at doing that? When something bad happens, and then something good happens to you, do you think it's God, or do you think it's just yourself? Because I can tell you right now, not a lot of good happens when you just plan things on your own, and it's better to have God with you going through it. But I can't imagine what those 2 years were like for Joseph, just sitting in the prison. Just, if it was me, after a day or two, I would just be sitting there like, hey, God, I told this guy to remember me. It's been like a day, and no one has come down to, come help me or anything. I can just imagine God kind of looking down like, you better get comfortable. You'll be waiting a little bit. And so, after Joseph interpreted the dream, by the way, this was the dream. So, Pharaoh had this dream where there would be 7 years of plentiful harvest and abundance of everything in the land. And like harvest would do great, lands would never, you'll never see a harvest like this ever again. Like this is the best thing you've ever had. And Joseph said to just save up as much as you can because there's going to be 7 years of famine. The worst famine you will ever see. And it's going to absolutely destroy everything. You won't be able to grow anything, and the land will just be dry. And after Joseph interprets this, Pharaoh sees the hand God has on Joseph and sees God through Joseph. And because of that, Pharaoh just decides to make Joseph the second most powerful person in Egypt. Just like that. It says in Genesis 41:44, then Pharaoh said to Joseph, I am Pharaoh, but without your word, no one will lift hand or foot in all of Egypt. In the span of what I would say maybe an hour, maybe less, maybe a little bit longer, Joseph has gone from being in prison to now being the second most powerful person in Egypt. What a flip. That is amazing. That it can only happen through God. And just having the patience and just trusting God's plan through all of this. And nowhere does it say in these 2 years Joseph ever doubted God or questioned God. Was like, hey, God, when is it my turn to be let out of here? Joseph waited patiently for God's plan and trusted in God and what he was doing. So after this 7 years of amazing harvest and abundance of everything, came the 7 years of famine. And now we get to see Joseph's brothers and father again. So because of this famine, Jacob told his 10 sons, to go to Egypt to get some grains, to get some food, because they didn't know about the famine, and they're kind of struggling. He did not let Benjamin go, who was the youngest son, because he was afraid something might happen to him. And so we are going to be in Genesis 42, 6 through 17. Now Joseph was the governor of the land, the person who sold grain to all its people. So when Joseph's brothers arrived, they bowed down to him with their faces to the ground. As soon as Joseph saw his brothers, he recognized them, but he pretended to be a stranger and spoke harshly to them. Where do you come from? He asked. From the land of Canaan, they replied, to buy food. Although Joseph recognized his brothers, they did not recognize him. Then he remembered his dreams about them and said to them, you are spies. You have come to see where our land is unprotected. No, my lord, they answered. Your servants have come to buy food. We are all the sons of one man. Your servants are honest men, not spies. No, he said to them, you have come to see where our land is unprotected. But they replied, your servants were 12 brothers, the sons of one man, who live in the land of Canaan. The youngest is now with our father, and one is no more. Joseph said to them, it is just as I told you, you are spies, and this is how you will be tested. As surely as Pharaoh lives, you will not leave this place unless your youngest brother comes here. Send one of your number to get your brother. The rest of you will be kept in prison, so that your words may be tested to see if you're telling the truth. If you're not, then as surely as Pharaoh lives, you are spies. And he put them all into custody for 3 days. If I'm Joseph in this situation, and I've seen my brothers after at least 9 years after what they did to him and stuff like that, I'd want to mess with my brothers a little bit too. You have the power. You got to mess with them a little bit. And so he threw him in jail for 3 days, which he could have done a lot worse, by the way. He's second in command in Egypt, the most powerful empire in the world at this point. He could have easily just sentenced them to death because he said they were spies. But no, he still gave them a chance and tested them to see if they had changed at all. And so, after the 3 days, Joseph took his brothers out of the prison and told 9 of them to return back to Jacob, and he held on to one of them to ensure they would come back with Benjamin. And let's read on. Genesis 42:21 through 26. They said to one another, "Surely we are being punished because of our brother. We saw how distressed he was when he pleaded with us for his life, but we would not listen. That's why the distress has come on us." Reuben replied, "Didn't I tell you not to sin against this boy? But you wouldn't listen. Now we must give an accounting for his blood." They did not realize that Joseph could understand them, since he was using an interpreter. He turned away from them and began to weep, but then came back and spoke to them again. He had Simeon taken from them and bound before their eyes. Joseph gave orders to fill their bags with grain, to put each man's silver back in his sack, and give them provisions for their journey. After this was done for them, they loaded the grain on their donkeys and left. Now, Joseph never knew that Reuben came back for him. Joseph was already... That brings the question, where was Reuben when Joseph was sold? Was he off just doing something else? I couldn't find it anywhere. The Bible doesn't really say where Reuben was. It just said they were having a meal. They sold him. Reuben came back later. Wasn't there. So you kind of wonder, where was Reuben in this situation? And Joseph didn't know that Reuben was going to come back and save him. And so because of the graciousness of just one brother, he had compassion on them and blessed them with the silver that they used to buy the grains from him, and just show his gratitude toward Reuben because of one person. That's all it takes. And so they returned back to Jacob, and they were like, "Hey, Dad, so they're keeping Simeon in the prison there because we have to bring Benjamin to the guy who's selling all the grain." And Jacob responded with something like, How does he know that Benjamin exists? He should never know this. They responded with something like, we kind of told him because he asked where we were from, and we told him there were 12 of us. One was already dead, and then one was still at home, and he wanted to meet the youngest one. Realizing there was nothing he could do to get out of this, Jacob said, "Yes, take Benjamin back with you." And then they opened up their bags and sold the silver. The silver that they used to pay for the grains were back in their bags. And so, as any normal person would, they kind of panic a little bit because they think they just stole from Egypt, the most powerful empire in the world. They have the silver that they just used to pay, and now they've stolen from them. So now, they're like, okay, we'd have to return the silver, but also bring more gifts. We have to repay them for stealing from them, stuff like that, so it doesn't seem like we're too bad of people or anything like that. And so they prepare gifts, they get the silver, they get their bags, they bring Benjamin with them, and they head back to Egypt. And then we're going to be reading from Genesis 43:16 through 24. When Joseph saw Benjamin with them, he said to the steward of his house, "Take these men to my house, slaughter an animal, and prepare a meal. They are to eat with me at noon." The man did as Joseph told him, and took the men to Joseph's house. Now the men were frightened, but they were taken to his house. They thought, we were brought here because of the silver that was put in our sacks the first time. He wants to attack us and overpower us and seize us as slaves and take our donkeys. So they went up to Joseph's steward and spoke to him at the entrance of the house. "We beg your pardon, our lord," they said. We came down here the first time to buy food, but the place where we stopped for the night, we opened our sacks, and each of us found his silver, the exact weight, in the mouth of his sack. So we have brought it back with us. We have also brought additional silver with us to buy food. We don't know who put our silver in our sacks." "It is all right," he said. "Don't be afraid. Your God, the God of your father, has given your treasure in your sack. I received your silver." And he brought Simeon out to them. The steward took the men into Joseph's house, gave them water to wash their feet, and provided fodder to their donkeys. Joseph forgave his brothers and blessed them after everything they did to him. After selling him, after throwing him into a pit to die, after making fun of him for years and just hating him, he forgave them and blessed them. And that is my last point, which is forgiveness. And I have a few questions for you guys. Who do you need to forgive? Who in your life are you holding a grudge against that you shouldn't be holding a grudge against? Who do you need to forgive and bless? Because God doesn't want you to have that grudge and have that jealousy and have that hatred towards that person. Just like Joseph, you can forgive them and bless them. Because I don't think you've ever been sold or, left for dead. I don't think anyone's ever did something that bad to you. In Matthew 18:21-22, Jesus is talking to Peter, and he says, Then Peter came to Jesus and asked, Lord, how many times shall I forgive my brother or sister who sins against me? Up to 7 times? Jesus answered, I tell you, not 7 times, but 77 times. And so I just want to take a time of response and reflection and think about the questions I asked you at the very end. Who do you need to forgive? Why can't you forgive them? What's stopping you from forgiving them? What can you do to bless them? So we're going to have a little music going. You're more than welcome to spread around the room. Journal it. I encourage you to journal it, pray about it, talk to God about it, because only He can help you with this.